to School of Ants. I'm Dr. Kirsty Abbott, and I want to thank you for collecting data for us and helping answer the question, what foods do ants prefer to eat at this time of year from the coast up to the mountains? We've got students from Coffs Harbour right up to at sea level, right up to Bald Blair on the top of the Great Dividing Range, collecting the same data and answering the same question at the same time. By understanding what foods ants like to eat along this altitudinal gradient from sea level right up to 1,330 metres above sea level, we can get an idea of how diets change from a warm, wet coastal climate right up to a dry, cooler, high elevation one. And this altitudinal gradient can actually be used as a proxy for global climate change, so that the changes we see across this gradient can help us track what ants' diets and ants are going to be doing into the future as our Earth's climate changes. Because ants deliver important ecosystem services from pest control right through to soil aeration and giving oxygen to plants, tracking the changes that happen with global climate change in ants will help us understand how ecosystem services will change into the future and how we can predict and manage our environment. But first things first, before you start the project, let's learn a little bit about ants.
Here at School of Ants, we enjoy learning about ants, and we hope that you will too. Not only to put in context the project that you're about to embark upon, but so that you notice the little things that run the world. Ants that are in your backyard and around your school, in your cupboard, ants in your pants, ants in your shoes, and maybe just to make you think about the role that they play in our environments. I'm imagining that one lazy day in Australia, in your lives, you may have seen this. A big bull ant, a Myrmecia ant, on a tree. You might have seen one crawling towards your shoe as well out in the bush. Or you might have maybe experienced this. Meat ants, Iridomermex purpureus, running across your shoe as you walk across their massive mound of a nest covered in pebbles. You probably brushed them off and cursed ants for the rest of your life, vowing that you would kill everyone that you come across. Well, as an Australian, you can't escape ants. They're everywhere. From the coast right up to the top of Mount Kosciuszko. They inhabit rainforests, they inhabit deserts, they're in temperate and tropical areas. They live in sand, they live on trees. They can live where you think not many animals can live. You might be familiar with bull ants in and around the New England northwestern region. They're endemic to Australia, and indeed you may have been bitten or stung by one and had a little bit of a reaction. Some people can react badly and have an anaphylactic shock. But as well as the big, really impressive ants, the orange ant on the right-hand side down the bottom in this picture is probably more like what most ants are like, small, probably a little bit unobtrusive. Most ant species you will never see in your life. They live in the soil, down underneath the leaf litter, or in twigs in trees, and we just won't notice them. You can learn more about ants online if you log on to the CSIRO site called Ants Down Under. There's information about distribution of ant species in Australia, life in a colony of ants, a life cycle, classification of ants, and also how to collect them and prepare specimens if you want to get a little bit technical. So look it up online if you want to know more other than the School of Ants project that you'll do here at school. Worldwide, there are more than 15,000 species and subspecies of ants. That's a lot, and ant researchers and taxonomists think that there's tens of thousands to be found and described. You might find a new ant species if you look hard enough. Ants are on every continent except Antarctica. It's too cold there. There are more species in the rainforests, which tend to be closer to the equator, and there's not very many species in colder places towards the poles. Recently, a new subfamily was named Martialidae, and you might notice it sounds a little bit like Martian. Well, it's true. They named the species Martialis eureka, and if you know anything about Latin, its name means a Martian. Wow! And they named it this because the ant looked so different and so strange compared to so many other ant species that we already know of. They thought it must have come from Mars, so they gave it a pretty cool name. So there's Martian ants, but there's also swimming ants. There's only a handful of ants that actually can swim and locomote themselves over the top of water. This is an Australian species which lives in mangrove areas, and their nests are inundated with water every 6 hours with the tide. But they can also direct themselves between mangrove sites and swim to different nest sites when they get stuck when the tide comes in. There's ants that can glide, or fly even if you choose to call it that. They have small projections on their bodies that kind of act like wings, and in fact when they're escaping from predators, the wind comes up and they need to get away, they throw themselves off the tree and in fact direct themselves, and I know it looks like it's falling here, but they direct themselves away from the tree that they were on and safely onto another plant or onto the ground. These guys live in South America and Central America. None that we know of in Australia yet. Keep an eye out. Trapdoor ants have the fastest moving mechanism of the animal kingdom. See those big mandibles set out like that? That's because these ants are solitary hunters. They're predators, and their mandibles stay wide until they find something to capture. And then, as they approach their prey, those mandibles snap shut at the fastest rate of any mechanism in an animal kingdom, even compared to stomatopods or mantis shrimps, which were once thought to have the fastest claws in the world that shoot out and kill fish as their prey. These are big ants also. And you won't see any around the northwestern region, I don't think, anyway, unless you go closer to Queensland. There's zombie ants, and yes, you're right, these are the living dead. This ant has been infected with a fungus called a cordyceps, or an Orpheocordyceps fungus. You can see the two bits of fungus coming out from the ant, but before the fungus actually grows like that, and after it infects the ant simply the living dead walks around and functions vaguely for a couple of hours until the fungus takes hold and kills it. Berry bum ants, well, are exactly that. Look at their abdomens. It looks like a berry. And in fact, this is because of an infection by a nematode worm. When the worm infects the ant, which a normal ant is the top picture, it changes the morphology and the behaviour of that ant. It causes the ant to go to the top of the tree that it lives on. It turns its abdomen red. It causes the ant to stick its abdomen up in the air, and a bird eats it, thinking it's a berry. And of course the nematode takes advantage of this by continuing its life cycle inside the bird, and then is pooed out and continues on its merry way, thanks to the ant as its intermediate host. Army ants. Millions and millions of troopers, workers and soldier ants march across Africa and South America and form bivouacs overnight of millions of ants in a seething mass. They annihilate a lot of things in their way. In fact, so much that human tribes in some areas in South America actually vacate their village if they see a troop of army ants coming towards the village. The army ants decimate everything, and then a couple of days later, the humans come back and continue living in their village. They form bivouacs overnight and hunker down to have a sleep before they start the same thing each day. Honeypot ants are here in Australia and also through Mexico and Central America. They have special worker ants, which are essentially pantries of sugar. They hang from the tops of nest chambers, as you can see here, and they're called repletes, replete with carbohydrates, honeydew and sugar sources for the rest of the colony, and to feed hungry, energy-driven workers to go and forage and get more food for the queen and the developing larvae. These ants were used for tens of thousands of years by Indigenous Australians as an important source of sugar in their diet. Turtle ants have a head that looks a little bit like a turtle shell, and you can see here that the ant head coming up through the hole in the wood here is about to plug up the nest entrance to actually protect the nest against an incoming enemy, like this little black ant walking along towards the nest entrance. Their heads are all sizes and shapes, but essentially their main function is to protect the colony by plugging up nest entrances and effectively stopping any enemies or predators getting inside the nest. Leafcutter ants are the oldest farmers in the world. They have been harvesting leaves for millions of years to feed their fungus. Leafcutter ants actually don't eat these leaves. They live on a fungus which they farm using these leaves. The fungus is what eats the leaves and lives on the leaves. So the leaf cutters go up into the trees, cut bits of leaves off, take them back to the nest. Their fungus grows on that, and they've got a ready source of food inside their nest. You might wonder why their fungus doesn't attack them and kill them. Well, the ants have got antibiotics on their exoskeleton, on their backs, and it protects them against infection from the funguses that they live and farm. Bull ants. Some of the biggest ants you'll ever see live in Australia. Myrmecia is the genus name of these, and as their big eyes and big mandibles suggest, they're solitary predators. You will rarely see these ants in a trail like you see other smaller ants. They hunt by themselves, and they need big eyes to see their prey and big mandibles to catch their prey, or to latch onto your foot or your arm. They also have a pretty big sting, and the sting is what causes a reaction and the lump, the itchiness, and possibly an anaphylactic shock for some people in Australia. If you haven't been stung by a bull ant, you're not Australian. Go out and look for one. Insects and spiders look like ants, but aren't really ants, and in fact they have a marvellous mimicry of ants. The top picture on the left is a spider, and the bottom is a juvenile bug. They've both mimicked an ant species in order to get away from predators or to access habitat or food that they couldn't normally access. On the right hand side you can see how similar the spider on the top looks to the ant that it mimics in the picture underneath. So there's lots of other species that want to look like ants but aren't. And boys, I'm afraid to say, in the ant world you're not very common. Here's a male on the left hand side here. The big ant at the back with wings is a queen, and the queen lays eggs for her entire life. A male is smaller and it also has wings, and the worker is the small ant in the front of this picture. Males are produced only a few times a year, only once in some species, and some of them don't even eat. They can live for between 2 and maybe 10 to 12 days. They mate with queens when they find one, and then usually they die immediately or a few days after that. They're not really very cooperative, and in fact, the ants that you see throughout your lifetime will most likely all be girls. They're more related to one another than they are to the boys in the colony or to the males in the colony. And that's another story about reproduction of ants. But it seems that over evolutionary history, girls cooperate better in ant nests. Now these nests can be big and really easily seen, or they can be small and very cryptic and be hidden between pavers in the footpath or around your house. So sometimes you have to get your eye in to identify ant nests of different species. Ants undergo a typical holometabolous metamorphosis, just like butterflies. There's no picture of an egg in this, but from the egg hatches a larval stage. They go through 3 larval stages before they weave a cocoon around them and form a pupae. The ants on the right hand side of this picture, the white and the brown ant, are what's inside an ant cocoon. And then when the cocoon breaks open, they hatch out to become an adult worker ant, which is on the left hand side of this picture. And the worker and the queen pupae look different, so you can tell which is going to become a worker and a queen. This is what eggs look like, and they're massed together in lumps like this. They're a bit sticky and are moved around en masse to areas in the nest that are suitable temperature for their development. And this is what the pupae look like, kind of like furry little jelly beans in a way. And you can see here that a worker ant is moving them around with their mandibles. Ants eat all sorts of things. This part's relevant to the project you're just about to do. You can see here this ant is eating, or they're carrying away, a wasp. But ants also kill and carry away and eat other ant species. But on top of the protein sources from insects that they kill, they also need sugar to keep their energy levels up to forage and fight. You can see the droplet of honeydew in the mandibles of this ant, which has come from the scale insect that it's standing astride. Scale insects, aphids, plant hoppers, lerps and other insects excrete honeydew as a waste product, and ants take advantage of this for their sugar intake. But ants can also exploit plant nectar and other sources of carbohydrates from plants. You might like to look out for some. When ants are running up and down tree trunks, they're usually looking for some sort of sugary substance in the tree. And if they come down with a full abdomen and you can see them clearly, you can see the sugar clearly in their abdomen, then they've found some sugar and some awesome honeydew in the tree. So that leads me to this project that you guys are about to do for us. Answering the question, what do ants like to eat at this time of year from the coast to the mountains? So we know that sometimes ants like protein and sometimes they like carbohydrate. And this has to do with what's available in the environment for them, and also what their individual nutritional needs are, but also a lot to do with the needs of the colony, whether the colony is producing a lot of eggs to turn into queens or males, or if they're simply producing worker eggs. And so an ant's diet changes, just like ours, as the year changes and their needs change. This is how you will assess what ants like to eat, using these cards simply put in 3 different habitats around your school. 4 cards on concrete, 4 cards on grass, and 4 cards in garden beds somewhere. And on top of these cards you'll have 3 different food types representing the nutrients that ants will choose. You've got Scotch finger biscuits that have got sugar and fats in them and oils. You've got some Frankfurt, which represents a protein source, and you've got a cotton wool ball which is soaked in simple sugar solution, which represents your sugar and simple carbohydrates for ants. Your setup around the school will look something like this. There's your 4 cards on the concrete, grass and garden. Don't put them too far away from each other. The cards will be about 2 or 3 metres away from each other in each habitat. Make sure you don't lose sight of each other between habitats though, so you can watch and collect ants together. Some important things to remember about your cards is to label them. Doing science is a lot about keeping track of observations and records and labelling exactly what you do. So please put your number and the habitat on your card before you put it out. And keep the food sources apart slightly so that the ants can choose whether they would like to eat Frankfurts, Scotch finger biscuits, or sugar from a cotton wool ball. Your data sheet, which is associated with each card, looks like this, and it's very important that you fill this out accurately for us. It needs your name, the school that you attend, the date that you do the experiment, and have a look at the time that you put your cards out. Put them all out together and put the food on at the same time. Circle and record the habitat in which your card is placed, and make some observations about the weather. It's important for us to know whether it's sunny, cloudy, windy, overcast, a little bit cool or hot, and if you've got a thermometer, measure the temperature. That would be great. It helps us interpret the data. After an hour of collecting ants, sneak up on your card. Ants are very easily disturbed, and record the number of ants that you see on a sugar cotton ball, the biscuit and the Frankfurt, and record how many ants are on them in the space on your data sheet. Then record the time that you collect the cards and put them into your Ziploc bag. Sometimes picking up these cards can be pretty tricky. The ants are disturbed and run off the cards at a rate of knots. So I'll show you a little video of what it might look like, but you've got to be pretty quick. Make sure that you get someone to help you. In the hour that you're waiting for the ants to recruit to your food sources, go collect ants. Grab a vial from your teacher with ethanol in it, and whether you've got tweezers or your fingers or a pooter or some other means of picking up ants, collect as many different species from as many different habitats as you can. At the bases of trees, under bark, on plants, on flowers, from nests, anywhere. They're all over buildings too, if you notice. When you finish collecting ants, just before you count the ants on your bait cards, please label the vial that you collect. On a piece of paper on the bottom of your data sheet, write in lead pencil your name, your school, and the date that you've collected these ants. Make sure the top is tightly sealed on your vial and send it to us. Your vial might look something like this, with lots of different ant species in it, or it might only have a couple of really small ones in the bottom. That's okay. Any ant species that you collect at your school will tell us something about the diversity and distribution of ant species across our altitudinal gradient and schools. So thanks again for your contribution. Have a look at this next little video about how difficult it is that it can be sometimes difficult to do your Ziploc bagging, and good luck with your project. I look forward to hearing about your results and how it went.